On June 12, 2026, at around 11:50 in the morning, a number appeared on a screen that had never existed in human history. Elon Musk's net worth crossed $1 trillion, the first time any single person had ever been worth that much. And if you're like most people, you probably read that headline, registered that it was a lot, and moved on with your day. Because a trillion doesn't feel like anything. It's too big. Your brain just slides off it and lands somewhere more manageable. So here's what it actually looks like. You want to spend $1 trillion, and you're going to do it at a rate that sounds genuinely obscene. $1 million every single day, no weekends, no holidays, just a steady million a day from the moment you wake up until it's gone. It would take you 2,737 years. You would have needed to start in 700 BC, when ancient Greece was still a collection of city-states and Rome hadn't become an empire yet. And if you'd started spending on the day Athens was at its absolute peak, you'd be finishing up right about now. That's $1 million a day, every day, for the entire recorded history of Western civilization, and you'd still just be getting through it. The time comparison is the one that really stopped me. A trillion seconds ago wasn't last year or last century or even the last millennium. A trillion seconds ago was 29,000 BC. Woolly mammoths were alive. Humans were living in caves, painting animals on walls by firelight, tens of thousands of years away from inventing writing or farming or the wheel. If someone had started counting from one at that exact moment, one number every second with no breaks and no sleep, they would be reaching 1 trillion right now. That's the gap between us and the woolly mammoths, measured in seconds, and it fits inside one person's bank balance. Before we get to the ridiculous comparisons, the wealth context alone is worth sitting with for a second. Musk's 1 trillion is larger than the combined annual GDP of Switzerland, Sweden, and Norway. It's larger than the combined wealth of the bottom 46% of all humanity. That's 3.8 billion people, the poorer half of everyone alive on Earth. And one person has more than all of them put together. The top 10 richest people in the world hold about $3 trillion between them, which means 1/3 of that entire group's wealth sits with a single individual. These numbers aren't arguments, they're just what the number is, and it's worth knowing what it is before we start spending it. A cup of coffee from a decent cafe costs about £3.50. A mid-range family car is around £30,000. A house in the UK, depending on where you're buying, might be £400,000. And those are the numbers most people spend their entire working lives thinking about. Saving for, worrying about, building toward. $1 trillion buys 2.6 million of those houses, every single one paid in full. No mortgage, no interest, nothing. Just hand it over. A Lamborghini Urus, the kind of car that makes people turn around on the street to look, costs around $230,000, and $1 trillion buys 4.3 million of them, which is enough to give every single person in New Zealand their own Lamborghini with a few 100,000 cars left over that you'd probably just hand out because at that point the number doesn't mean anything anymore. If you wanted something even more extreme, a Bugatti Chiron runs around $3.4 million, one of the rarest production cars on Earth, and 1 trillion buys approximately 294,000 of them. And if you line them up bumper to bumper, they would stretch from London all the way to Sydney. Or you could give every single person in Canada a brand new Toyota Camry, all 38 million of them, and still have $940 billion left. You could buy 3 billion pizzas and feed all of America for free for 27 years. These are not exaggerations. This is just what the number does when you point it at things. In all of human history, every mine ever dug and every river ever panned has pulled approximately 208,000 tons of gold out of the earth. And at today's prices, all of it together is worth around $13 trillion, which means $1 trillion buys you roughly 8% of every piece of gold humanity has ever found. But the one that lands harder is this. The United States holds the largest national gold reserve in the world. Everything stored in Fort Knox and the Federal Reserve Vault in New York, and a handful of military installations across the country. And that entire reserve is worth approximately $750 billion. $1 trillion buys all of it, and you'd still have $250 billion sitting there, with nothing to spend it on. The Premier League has 20 clubs, and if you bought every single one of them, Manchester City, Arsenal, Chelsea, Liverpool, all 20, the combined price comes to around $120 billion, which sounds like an enormous amount of money, until you realize you'd still have $880 billion left. You could buy Manchester United alone 166 times with what remains. There are roughly 150 countries in the world with a GDP under $1 trillion. Switzerland, Sweden, Norway, Belgium, Argentina, Ireland, Israel. And $1 trillion outspends every single one of their entire annual economies. Iceland's GDP is about $31 billion, which means 1 trillion funds the entire country of Iceland for 32 years. The USS Gerald R. Ford is the most expensive warship ever built, a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier that cost $13 billion and took years to construct. And $1 trillion builds 76 of them. You'd have the largest naval force in human history, with money left over to send 18,000 people to space on a SpaceX flight at $55 million a seat. Now here's where the number changes shape entirely. If you divided $1 trillion equally among every person on Earth, all 8 billion of us, Each person would get $125, which sounds almost insultingly small after everything we've just been through. You've heard about Lamborghinis and aircraft carriers and the entire US gold reserve, and the share that lands in each person's hands is barely enough for a weekly shop. But for roughly 700 million people on this planet living on less than $2.15 a day, $125 is nearly 2 months of income. It's the difference between a child going to school or not, between a family eating or not. The same number that feels like nothing to someone watching this on their phone is genuinely life-changing for almost 1 in 10 people alive right now. The UN estimates that ending global hunger entirely, actually feeding every person on Earth who doesn't have enough to eat, costs around $40 billion a year. $1 trillion funds that for 25 years. The entire annual budget of the NHS is around $200 billion, and $1 trillion covers 5 full years of it. The number doesn't change. What changes is what it means depending on where you're standing when you hear it. Stack $1 trillion $1 bills on top of each other, and the pile reaches 67,866 miles into the sky, more than a quarter of the way to the moon. Lay them end to end instead, and they stretch 96 million miles, further than the distance from the Earth to the Sun. $1 trillion $1 coins would weigh 900 billion kilograms, which is heavier than every human being who has ever lived, combined, across the entire history of our species. On June 12, 2026, one person woke up and was worth all of that: the Premier League. The US gold reserve, a quarter of the way to the moon in stacked dollar bills, 25 years of ending world hunger, every Lamborghini in New Zealand, and every Bugatti from London to Sydney. The wealth of 3.8 billion people sitting in a single account, and the number that represents it, the number that takes 29,000 years to reach if you count 1 second at a time, the number that didn't exist in any human being's name until 11:50 on a Tuesday morning last June, fit in a single headline that most people scrolled past on their phone without stopping. That's what $1 trillion looks like.